The Gospel of Luke, chapter 11, beginning at verse 42. Jesus said, "But woe to you, Pharisees, for you tithe mint and rue and herbs of all kinds, and neglect justice and the love of God. It is these you ought to have practiced, without neglecting the others. Woe to you, Pharisees, for you love to have the seat of honor in the synagogues, and to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces. Woe to you, for you are like unmarked graves, and people walk over them without realizing it." One of the lawyers answered him, "Teacher, when you say these things, you insult us too." And he said, "Woe also to you, lawyers, for you load people with burdens hard to bear, and you yourselves do not lift a finger to ease them." May I speak in the name of God, Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer of all. Amen. Today's reading from Luke's Gospel, chapter 11, quoted Jesus talking to Pharisees and lawyers. The context is that a Pharisee had invited Jesus to dinner and was offended that he didn't wash before sitting down for a meal. Jesus was a very challenging guest. He was not just talking in a friendly way, but being very direct, very critical, saying, "Woe to you." A modern translation called The Message translates the words, "Woe to you, Pharisees," as, "You're hopeless, you Pharisees, frauds." Jesus said they were very particular about tiny matters, working out exactly how to give a tenth of their herbs to God, while neglecting more important issues. What were the more important issues for Jesus? Practicing justice and the love of God. If we tried to imagine ourselves having a meal with Jesus, I wonder if we would know what the important issues were and are for Jesus. He said the Pharisees were neglecting justice and the love of God. When we have decisions to make, where does justice come into them? At the basic level, do we think to ask ourselves, what would Jesus do? If we have money to spare at the end of the week or the month, is that because we are careful, or because we are selfish or mean? If people cannot make ends meet, are they somehow to blame, or is there a justice issue to do with political decisions? Are you called to be a campaigner or a protester? Or do you deplore people who make a fuss about poverty or fair trade or universal credit? Practicing justice and the love of God. What do we mean by the love of God? How can we practice it? If we had a public opinion poll, what would people say demonstrates the love of God? Being a good neighbour? Being kind and thoughtful for others? Treating people as we expect to be treated ourselves? Being willing to go a mile in another person's shoes? Being ready to sacrifice our own preferences? What about the ultimate sacrifice? Dying to save someone else. Jesus gave some examples of behaviour that he deplored. He said that the Pharisees liked being important and showing off, liked being having the best seats in the synagogue, and being greeted with respect in the town. He used a phrase that sounds strange, saying that they were like unmarked graves. That conjures up a picture of a grassy churchyard covering up rotting corpses. It's not really surprising that people were shocked that he compared them with something that looked good on the outside, but was literally rotten inside. So those were Jesus' criticisms of the Pharisees. Some lawyers who were also present took offence at his words. Jesus was critical of them too. He said that they piled burdens on people and did nothing to help them. The burdens he meant were probably the rules and regulations that Jewish people had to live by, all the things people were told they should do or not do, things they were told or felt themselves that they ought to do, what someone called the hardening of the auguries. Elsewhere, in Matthew chapter 11, Jesus talked about burdens when he said, "Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." Many of us are currently weary, and some are carrying heavy burdens, feeling worried about their health, their job, their income, and their family. The yoke Jesus mentioned is a piece of wood shaped to rest on your shoulders, to carry 2 buckets of milk or water, one at each end. If you look closely in the stained glass window in St. Thomas's Chapel in St. Mary and St. Nicholas Church, you will see that the artist has imagined the young Jesus in Joseph's workshop, shaping a yoke for a customer. When he said, "My yoke is easy," he was saying with the pride of a craftsman that a yoke he had made would be comfortable, spreading the weight of the buckets across your shoulders. I think he also meant that, unlike the lawyers, Jesus did not overburden his friends with more than they could comfortably bear. For a long time, certainly from the 19th century, there have been theologians, both Jewish and Christian, who claimed that Jesus himself was a Pharisee. If so, he was criticizing and challenging people he knew well, people who were very religious and very sure that they were right. We have to be careful that we're not frauds or show-offs, and that we don't burden other people with unnecessary religious rules and regulations. It's good to be reminded that Jesus tells us not to neglect justice and the love of God. Amen.